Welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and today we're talking about prayer, we're talking about time with the Lord, and now we're going to talk about God's timeline. You know, God's timeline is God's timeline, and His sovereignty is perfected throughout His Word, that because He knows best, because He has a plan for us, that we neither need to be behind or ahead, but we need to be walking with the Lord by our side. I am delighted to welcome Marlo Schalesky to the program. She is the author of Waiting for Wonder, Learning to Live on God's Timeline, and I'm very excited about sharing this book with you. Welcome, Marlo, to our program.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, it's our delight. You are an award-winning author of 10 books. You're quite a prolific author. As well as a regular speaker and columnist. You're living with your husband, 6 young children, a menagerie of animals in Salinas, California. And people can find out more about you at vividgod.com. Tell me a little bit about you and your family and your community, what really inspired you to step out with this particular book. What experience drove you to this?
Yes, I often tell people that I think I should have a PhD in the art of waiting, because God has taught me so much and so many lessons on waiting. I am not very good at it at all. I like to be way ahead of God. I like to be doing, and God has had to teach me that I need to wait. I need to watch for His timing. And one of the big things that I was taught that by God through is infertility. We spent 11 years trying to have our first child, and then the first 4 children were all infertility babies. So we had 20 years on the infertility journey, waiting and praying and finding out that my timing is not God's timing. So it was a very difficult wait. It was only after I had turned 40 and I'd learned this lesson of waiting for 20 years that God gave us 2 additional children naturally that were complete surprises. And I'm very much on the non-statistic side. We're not supposed to be having babies after 20 years of infertility, but that's how it happened.
Wow. Well, that certainly is a journey. Now, during that time, was your faith really being tested? Were you being challenged to trust in God? Or did you have an innate trust in God and belief that He had something in store for you that was greater than what you had in store for yourself?
Theoretically, I trusted God, but in my real everyday life, it was a huge struggle. I struggled to believe that God really loved me, that He really had a plan for me. I knew it in my head, and I had studied the scriptures, but when it came down to that everyday life and the disappointments and the hope being delayed again, I found it so difficult to really believe that this waiting thing was a gift from God. And it was only through that journey that God showed me that I was wrong. It is a gift, but it goes against everything in my nature to wait well. So I'm very appreciative of God and of the story of Sarah that I talk about in the book, because it really helped to change my heart in this place where I am not naturally good at it.
When did you come to the realization that waiting was a blessing?
Sometimes I'm still not there, but it was really through studying Sarah's life and finding and seeing that so much that God had done through her life. She would not have been the blessing to the whole world that was promised at the beginning had it not been for the wait, had she had Isaac immediately. It was that wait that brought her journey into a place of beauty and wonder that impacts us today. And then looking at her story and looking back at mine, and I saw that God had taken me from a place really where my happiness was based on how much can God do for me. If He loves me, He would do this and that. And He showed me Himself through this long waiting journey in ways I would have never, ever seen Him before. And now I look at it and say, wow, I'm glad that I went through the journey. It was miserable and it was hard, and we even had miscarriages in there. It was just horrible. And yet God took all that darkness and weight and brought me to a new place. Became something beautiful.
During that time, did you do like Sarah did and take matters into your own hands and kind of guide your husband, or look at adoption or alternative methods? Did you, when you say you got out ahead of God, how did that happen? What were you doing that was getting you ahead of his plan?
For me in the infertility journey, if I could have, I would have. But I would try various medical techniques. Most of the time they fail. So if I would have had the power to try to do it myself and to get that baby in the timeline I wanted, I would have made those same mistakes. I had the same impatience, the same desperation. I so relate to Sarah in that. And I think we all do, maybe not with infertility, but with other things. It's like, gosh, we have our dreams, we want them now. And for me, God just simply said no. I could not get ahead of him because we would try various methods and they'd fail and they'd fail and they'd fail. And he'd bring me always to a place of brokenness, of giving up. It's like, well, Lord, I'm going to continue. I'll do the treatments that you've set in front of me, but I see that this is completely out of my hands. So I give up. And only then, for me anyway, did anything ever move or ever happen.
As you have learned that lesson, you faced that challenge, and you've come to the other side of it, where you have a full quiver, 6 young children. When you look back on it, do you look back on it with laughter, like Sarah did when she was told that in a year's time she would have a son, and he would be the son of the promise, and that she would become the mother of many nations at the age of 90?
Oh, yes. Sometimes we're walking down the aisle of the grocery store, the whole group of us, and I can almost hear God laughing. So because we had gone from such longing to this crowd. I was always aiming for 3, and somehow I was on this buy one get one free plan eventually. And there's this giant crowd, and it's noisy and it's chaotic, and it's so not who I am. And God has brought me to this place where, again, I'm needing to trust in him. I'm like, this is more than I can handle now. So many children. And it's become this beautiful thing of relying on God, of listening to his laughter. And that's been sometimes aggravating, sometimes fun for me. But I think for God, it's a lot of fun.
Right. Well, how is your husband Abraham doing?
He's overwhelmed too. But it's been fun to be on this journey with him. And I relate to Sarah so much, and you handle it differently, the waiting. And yet you're coming through it together and trying to give room for one another to make mistakes and to walk and to find God in these new and deeper ways through this long waiting process.
So you married at the usual age?
Yeah. How old was I? I think I was 21.
21, okay.
Yeah.
And immediately wanted to start a family, or had a vision for starting a family?
Yeah, we discussed even before we were married that we wanted 3 children. We were going to hope for 3 children. And I had no idea that these things didn't just happen when you plan them. It's like, that's how it works, right? You plan it, it happens, you have your family just the way you want it, you have your life the way you want it. And I tell you, these past many years now has been God teaching me that I don't have my life the way I want it. To follow him means to follow his timeline and to follow his dream for my life instead of my own plans and dreams. And that's been a tough lesson for me. But it's beautiful when you get through it. It's beautiful, but it's hard learning that and coming to grips with that idea.
It requires complete surrender. Surrendering your agenda for God's agenda, your time for his time, and knowing that when you look back on it, you will actually see that your way was a crooked path and his way was a straight path.
Absolutely.
One of the things that God is very linear that way, and we tend to divert and walk kind of wobbly, if you will, like a weeble. They wobble, but they don't fall down. So on this journey through this infertility, what were some of the real moments where you had almost given up hope, but you were able to grab a hold of something? along the way that kept you pressing in? You just continue to press in. You did not give up.
Right. I had this beautiful experience right at the point where we had many, we were 10 years in, many procedures, many failure, every month for 10 years, failure, failure, failure. And I remember sitting at church, and my husband was leading worship that day, and he started this hymn. It was Mother's Day. I sat in the back. I didn't want anything to do with this service or anything. I mean, against the wall in the back on these little chairs, and they played My Jesus, I Love Thee. If ever I love thee, the hymn said, my Jesus, 'tis now. And I took the deepest breath because I thought, now? Really? If ever I loved him, now on Mother's Day, when we're singing praises to God, do I love him today? And God just broke through to me on that day and broke my heart until I could say yes today. Today, when all the things that God hasn't done for me yet are in my face, I'm going to sing to him. Oh, I bawled and I sang If Ever I Love Thee now today. And it was just an amazing moment. And that was the beginning of changing my life through infertility on that day. It wasn't long after that I found out I was actually pregnant with our first daughter. But like, again, I always have to be broken, and then God moves through.
Well, it's a fabulous story about God's mercy and grace and meeting us, healing us in the broken places, which makes us stronger. You work with horses a lot.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many amazing lessons to be learned from horses.
Oh yeah.
We have 9 the breaking of what we call a breaking of a horse to really submit to the will of the owner, the master, the one who has them. And we're not breaking their spirit. What we're doing is we're getting them to where they can walk a straight line.
Yeah. Become who they were meant to be. I have 9 here, and I have one that we broke. And every day, though, that we ride him, we have to remind him, today you are not the boss again. You're not the king of the world again today. And he's like, oh. But that's the only way he can become who he is created to be. He's an incredibly smart, amazing, talented horse who can run gymkhana, he can do trail rides, he can jump, he can do anything. But he first has to realize that he's not the boss of his world. He's not in charge. Otherwise, he just goes and he's stubborn, he won't do anything.
Well,
so absolutely what you say, we see it here every day.
God uses the things of the natural to show us supernatural truths, and animals are something he uses all the time throughout Scripture, throughout our natural lives. And it's so interesting that your ministry is really the Wonderwood Ranch that you have built there in Salinas, that you minister to people through animals.
Yes. I just love this new ministry. It's just, what's beautiful about it is we have, let's see, all those animals. We have 9 horses, 2 mini horses, donkeys, chickens, rabbits, just all kinds of things. And kids can come and they open kind of their lives. We only have kids pretty much from inner city or kids living at the homeless shelter with their moms, so we'll have them out. Kids who would never have this opportunity to interact with animals, and it changes their lives. And I use these animals to talk about life things because, as you say, what they do illuminates things in our own lives. So every time I have kids out, I'll tell them a story about one of the animals and what they've done and how that relates to how we can live our lives better. So story after story after story about not facing life with fear, about submitting to wisdom and all that stuff. It's been a beautiful thing to have this new ranch.
You have written so eloquently in Waiting for Wonder, Living to Live on God's Timeline. Our culture is not a culture of waiting. We're in that
no.
instant gratification. We're in that I want patience and I want it now kind of environment. We pray for patience immediately. How is this contrary? The God of, you refer to him as the God of waiting. Discovering the God of waiting, the God who makes you wait.
Yes.
It's so diametrically opposed to this societal trend towards instant. You know, when I was a kid and the Brownie camera came out, and this is going way back to the Wayback Machine, my father would take a picture, but we didn't see that picture for ever.
Right.
You know, I've got some of them now that are 65 years old, that are from that little Brownie box camera. You waited. When Polaroid came along with the first self-developing, everybody jumped on that because now you could get an instant picture. The quality wasn't great. It wasn't something that broke down over time. It was not a lasting memory. Few people have Polaroids left of their childhood, going back 60 or 70 years. But in this instant society, how were you able to grab a hold of this concept of the God of waiting?
Oh, you're right. Our culture, there's nothing in our culture that helps us to wait well or even to accept the idea that waiting can be a blessing and that waiting is not a problem. I know for me, one of the biggest things I've had to get over is this idea that waiting is wrong. We're led to believe that if you're waiting in any way, something has gone wrong. Either you haven't learned something fast enough. If only you were better, you know, God would move faster, it's your fault. Or something's wrong with God. God's not moving fast enough because everything is, there's a problem with it. And yet throughout the entirety of the Bible, we see that waiting is a tool in the hand of God. It's not something that's gone wrong, but it's something he uses to bring everything about for his wonder and for the beauty of what he's trying to do. And that very concept, I mean, just realizing that has helped me so much as I study the life of Sarah and see that she's not being punished because she's not learning fast enough. This is just the way God's setting it up so that at the end we get something more beautiful, more wondrous, more incredible than we ever could have had before. So just realizing that God is working toward our joy, toward something more beautiful and wonderful in my life, in anyone's life, that has changed the way I look at waiting. I am, again, not naturally good at this. I want it now. I've got to figure, here it is, God, here's my plan, let's do it right this second. I tend to be way out ahead of him and find that I can't very well walk with him when I'm out ahead of him. I can't see what he's doing. I can't understand anything. There's no partnership. And then God is telling me, no, I am walking at this pace in this direction because this is the path to an amazing joy that you can't see and that you have no idea about yet. Come walk with me. And for me, knowing that even now, because I'm still not the best waiter ever, it's like I still want it, let's get it done now. Let's make a list. Let's, push forward. And often God will say, it's okay, remember what I've taught you, and that is I'm working toward your joy. And I love the name Isaac, for Sarah, we're moving through to laughter, to
Right.
joy.
I think as we look at the various characters of the Bible, we understand that God's plans have to marinate. It's a marination process. It's a tenderizing process. It's a preparation process. If every one of us had our prayers answered instantaneously and we got everything we asked for, I think we would be ill-equipped because we're not prepared, we're not mature, we're not capable, we're not good stewards. We would squander the gifts that were given to us. But how precious are your children to you now that you waited for them so long?
Yeah.
And how much
They
are you
are.
willing to invest in them because of this wait? And the lessons that you teach them about patience and that long suffering, because truly waiting 20 years is a period of long suffering that emulates one of the fruits of the Spirit, is that long-suffering, is patience, is manifested. And all the fruit that God gives us, he calls it fruit because it's mature. All the gifts are mature. We grow into them. He doesn't give us an immature gift that grows along with us. He gives us a mature gift. And so when we look at that, were you really prepared? Would you have stopped at 3?
I probably would have. And yet God had a completely different plan. And I love how you talked about fruit, because it's very much like fruit, which takes time to ripen.
Yes.
God knows when to pluck it from the tree. I would be plucking raw fruit all the time if it were up to me.
Well, that's exactly
it's good,
right.
It's close enough. And God says, no, we want that sweetness, that ripe, that beauty.
Well, you're there. Do you have trees on your property? Do you have any orchards? Do you have anything?
We have a few. Just so we have like an apple tree and just a few. They don't grow very well, and then the deer eat them.
Right.
So,
but you're in a beautiful area in Salinas. It's a beautiful country there. Most people aren't familiar with that part of California. It's quite gorgeous. We're going to take a short break here for a minute, and when we come back, we're going to regroup with Marlo Schalesky, author of Waiting for Wonder, learning to live on God's time frame. You can follow her at her website, www.vividgod.com, or on Facebook, Marlo, M-A-R-L-O, Schalesky, S-C-H-A-L-E-S-K-Y, and on Twitter at Marlo Schalesky. We'll take a brief break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. We're having a conversation with Marlo Schalesky. We're talking about discovering this God of waiting. How many of us have found in our own lives that we've been challenged by the wait, wanting to get ahead of God, becoming impatient, wondering if God is ever going to answer our prayer, whether he's going to deliver us from the pressing in that's going on in our lives. It seems that the walls are closing in, but yet our promises that we have from God are not being manifest, and we have to wait. I don't know anybody that is good at waiting. Our prayer is often, Lord, I want patience and I want it right now. We're used to instant. We're used to believing that God is going to do the wonderful, the marvelous, the supernatural, but until we see it this next time. We saw it last time, but now we want it again, and we want it to be a shorter time than the last time. We want it on our time, not his time. And Marlo takes us on a journey in her book, Waiting for Wonder, Learning to Live on God's Timeline, that there are patterns in the Bible, there are people that we are to emulate, that their nature, their character, their condition, the realness, the transparency of a Sarai who became Sarah, the mother of many nations, that her journey with infertility, waiting for children, caused her to not only get ahead of God, but caused Marlo to also try to take matters into her own hands, to orchestrate her own blessing. But she came to the crossroads. And at that crossroads, she began to realize that God's blessings for her were much greater. As a matter of fact, when we talk about a double portion, we're actually talking about Marlo Schalesky, whose vision was 3 children and God gave her 6. Although she waited 20 years, she now has a full quiver with 6 young children running around the home. Please welcome back Marlo Schalesky to the program. Marlo, when we took a break, we were talking about words of encouragement. And your book is definitely a book which is the Aarons and the Hurs to lift up the arms of those that are growing impatient, for those that are finding themselves in the throes of not being so wonderful, not being so marvelous, not being so glorious. They're in the wait. And in the wait is a desperate and lonely place for some. It was a desperate and lonely place for you.
Yes.
But what words of encouragement do you have for those that are in the throes of despair, whether or not it's over infertility or over medical condition or finances or really any obstacle in their path, what would you say to them?
I'd say two things. The first is hang on. God has this. And the second thing I'd say is waiting is hard. It's the hardest thing I think that God asks us to do. And it's okay if you do it poorly. I think we feel like waiting needs to be this inactive, your hands are folded, and you're just completely at peace sort of thing. And that's not what we see in Scripture. That's not what we see in Sarah's life. It's certainly not what I see in my own. But waiting can be a time of wrestling, a struggle. It's hard. And God's fine with that. Maybe you've done something really dumb in your desperation. And you know what? God can deal with that too. Sarah made some huge mistakes. That's why I love studying her life, because she did this pretty badly. And it turned out beautifully all the same. God could take that and still bring his purpose and his blessing out. And that's the encouragement I give to those who are sitting there in the waiting place. It's like, struggle, it's fine. Just turn toward God. The only thing he cannot deal with is us turning and walking away. There's nothing beautiful he can bring of that. But as long as you're turning to him, even in frustration, desperation, fear, he can work with that and still bring something beautiful. So hang on. And that's what I even tell myself, because times I get where I'm even now in a place of waiting for that phone call from the test from the doctor. Oh, so hard. You know, your life can change, and getting the phone call is easier than waiting for it, because you just don't know, that don't know place. And to help me, I just remember that God's got this, and I turn to him with my fears now. And I'm not great at it still, but I at least have this resource. I at least have a few things I can hang on to. God is in it for my joy, and God is with me. Turn to him.
So there's really no example of anybody who was an elegant waiter in the Bible, is there?
I could not think of one.
And there's really no elegance to waiting, that perfecting this gift of waiting is not really one of the callings on anybody's life other than trust. It is that walk by faith and not by sight. It is that admonition to trust in the Lord and lean not on your understanding, but acknowledge him in all your ways, and he will make your path straight, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. As we look to the Word for the only way God can go before us is if we go behind him. That sounds quite simple and so obvious, but you really have to wrap your mind around that. I can't ask God to go before me and prepare the way if I'm not willing to wait on him to do so, if I'm not willing to follow his lead. You know, two of the most powerful words in the Bible are follow me. It was first foretold by Moses that one would come after me. You are to follow him and do everything he teaches, otherwise you'll be cut off from your people. Well, he was telling us that Jesus was going to be coming. And so when Jesus spoke those words, follow me, to Peter, and those words, follow me, to Levi, Matthew, they knew, because of the life and times that they were living in, that this was a revelation that no other prophet had ever said, follow me. As a matter of fact, they stay away from me, get away from me. But this follow me concept means that we are trained up not to be leaders, but to be disciples, which means we have to follow the leading of the Lord. Now, can we then lead other people? Yes, we can. But first, in order to be a good leader, you have to be a good follower. And in order to be a good follower, then you have to submit to the will of the leader. And if you're willing to submit to the will of the leader, then your day will come when it's supposed to, even though you may think you're ready. You may think, okay, I've got it. I've got this under control. I can handle it. Bring it on, Lord. I'm prepared. And it doesn't come. Because there's more seasoning. There's more preparation.
Yes. It's funny because people so often think that waiting is a passive activity, and it's not at all. It's an extremely active activity. A lot is going on in this waiting process. And I truly believe that it's in this waiting. It's in the dark places of our lives. It's where we cannot see God at all. That's where he's doing his deepest and most intimate work. And to see waiting as the preparation, as the ability to follow. Sometimes when we're waiting, we are followed. That's what we're doing. I know for me, though, I'd like to say, I will follow you, God, and here's how it should go. And then here's the timing it should happen in. And he's like, no, you need to learn to listen. I think that waiting is watching. It's this very active watching to see what God's doing, how he's moving, where he might be moving in our lives so that we can follow. And that misunderstanding that waiting is passive doesn't help us at all. That's what shipwrecks us in the waiting process.
Right. Look who's there. We have a visitor.
Yes. Hello. You
Hi.
need to go away.
You want to be on television? So good to see her. Well, Lamentations 3:25 says, the Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. He has a two-parter. The soul must seek him, and the Lord's good for those who wait for him. It is active. You have to be actively seeking the Lord. You have to be active in your walk. Being a believer is not a spectator sport in any aspect of it. It's full contact with the Holy One of Israel. King David wrote, wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. He emphasizes that. There's some 90 to 100 verses all dealing with the specifics of waiting. And so what you've done is you've kind of given our audience permission. Becoming your worst you is one of the titles of your chapter. When Abram says to Sarai, since she's your servant, do whatever you wish to her. So Sarai treated her harshly, and she ran away from Sarai. And you call this becoming your worst you. Walk us through that.
Yes, for Sarah, we often think of Sarah's biggest mistake as giving Hagar, her maidservant, to her husband because she was so desperate. And certainly that was a mistake, but what happens next? What happens next breaks my heart, and I get it. She had a plan, she took it into her own hands, and it went badly. Her servant starts to be rude to her and very disrespectful. And in response, Sarah does something that no one should do. And that is she starts to mistreat, abuse the servant. Now, back in her day, it was allowed for you could give your maidservant to your husband. That was perfectly culturally okay. But abuse was not. There were things you were supposed to do if you had a disrespectful servant, and being abusive wasn't one of them. So poor thing, she just becomes the very worst version of who she is because of this long wait. And what I love about what God does is that he doesn't shame her in that. Hagar leaves, and God brings Hagar back, gives promises, and restores this relationship. He restores what she broke. And it's a beautiful thing. And the very next thing he does is give Sarah his new name of El Shaddai and renames her. So he calls her into this deeper relationship with him instead of saying, well, you've become the weight was too much for you, you've become your worst version of yourself. Too bad, I need someone else. He restores and he redeems and he calls her deeper. And that's the last time we see her doing something like that. We'll see some other things out of her, but on those cases, she's on God's side. She's speaking what God wants to have happen. And I love that. It gives me a lot of courage and a lot of encouragement to know that what if in the wait I just become awful? What if I do bad things to people? It's not the end. God can restore, God can redeem, I can repent, and God can continue what he's trying to do in me. We can start again.
You know, I like the fact that you followed it up immediately from being your worst you to becoming your true you. So
Yes.
we get to look like a photograph. We're looking at the negative first, and now we're going to take a look at the real picture, what the real truth is. Because when we hold that negative up, we only see partially. It's not clearly defined. It's not in living color. It's just in tones of black and gray. But now you've had this picture developed of becoming the true you. And what does that look like?
it, that's what God is doing in that waiting period, is that developing that we can't see because there it is in the developing room in the dark. And he's bringing out the color in our lives and bringing out the beauty. And that's what he does for Sarah. It's just amazing what happens after she makes her worst mistakes. We see this amazing renewal of the promise. Mm-hmm. We see God bringing light and beauty and renaming her to Sarah from Sarai. And it shocks me. And when I was writing this book and studying deeply Sarah's life, this shocked me. It's like, really, right then, not after she'd done something super faithful, that God renames her, but when she's done her worst thing ever, God brings beauty, and such beauty that blesses us today. Millennia later, we can read about this renaming. We can see God through her eyes and deepen our own walk. She has truly blessed everyone, many nations through all time. And that's a promise I think we can get a hold of too. I think we need to remember that the promise is not Isaac. The promise is that many will be blessed. And that's a promise we can hang on to.
Absolutely.
For me, I didn't know if I was going to have children or not. God didn't promise that one way or the other. But he did promise that my life could be a blessing and can be a beautiful thing in his kingdom. And that's something I can hang on to.
Well, his original blessing to Adam and Eve was be fruitful and multiply and take dominion over the earth. His blessing to Abraham was be fruitful and multiply, and your offspring will be more numerous than the stars in the sky and the sands on the sea. And Sarah would be the mother of many nations. Now, I personally relate to this story because my Hebrew name is Avraham, Abraham, father of many nations, and I have no biological children. The father of many. I have an adopted daughter from Fallbrook, California, so down the road. But I have congregations and people who are my spiritual children, and those are more numerous than I can even keep up with. So God has a way of first imparting in a name and then renaming. And so at 8 days, it's tradition for a Jewish boy to receive his name, not his English name, but his Hebrew name, that which he'll be known as in the kingdom of heaven for all time. When you get a new name, and God gives you a new name, he's putting his personal seal on you. You truly become his own when he gives you the name. We believe that all names are prophetic, that there's a reason why we name our children what we do. Is it that they live up to the name, or that the name was telling us who they were going to be? We see very much in the story of the naming of all the sons in the Old Testament that their names had incredible meaning. Sarai, its name also had meaning. Sarah had meaning. Abram had one meaning. Avraham had another meaning. And so there's a gap of time between the old and the new. There was a period in time when Terah named his son Abram, that he grew up in an idol worshiper's house, that before he could become Abraham, there was a period of waiting. He had to answer the call. And even then, and this is an important part of my question for you, later on, sometime later, Abraham was tested. Okay? Isaac's now about 30 in his 30s when God tests Abraham, and he takes him to sacrifice him on Mount Moriah. Has your period of faith and waiting and provision been followed by a season of testing? And is that part of this process, that God makes a promise, or you bring a problem to God, he makes a promise, and then he gives you provision? Problem, promise, provision, and then testing. Have you seen that pattern in your own life with this waiting period?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're right. That's how it works. I wish it didn't. I wish it happened like you wait, you get through that, you're done. And now you live in happily ever after. Not found that to be the case. I wish it was. But there's this, as you say, this cycle. and then you come to testing. Lately, our biggest testing, now that we have all these children, is he was 6 at the time, he just turned 8, but he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And type 1 is an autoimmune disease that it can kill you in a day. They have no prevention for it. They don't know what causes it, and there's no cure.
Right.
And you have this blood sugar ketone thing that you're just dealing with every day. So he has to take insulin. But if he takes too much insulin at the wrong times, his blood sugar can go too low, he can seizure and die. If he fails to take sufficient insulin, then his body will shut down, then he can die. So I've been spending so much time lately in this dance of trusting God, doing what I know to do, and laying him. It's like this is my promised son in a lot of ways. It's my only boy, and his life, we've given it to God, into God's hands, but it's so tangible now because it's any minute. You just don't know. It's such an unpredictable disease. You can be just fine. You can live just normally, but at a moment's notice, things can go south and go awry. And it is really starting to teach me this idea of laying Isaac on the altar, watching for what God will do and how God will intervene, and just trying to be faithful and not afraid, and not all the time afraid.
It's interesting that the diabetic's life is very much the way we're supposed to pattern our lives in our walk with the Lord. We are constantly supposed to check ourselves, adjust and check. And it's interesting that God's walking you through this discipline, not discipline in meting out punishment, but discipline as in the root word of disciple, training you in a particular methodology and a particular path that you have to walk, which you cannot skip a step. It is a thorough process. Of any shortcut whatsoever can have dramatic effect. And so you've taken this very faithful journey with the Lord for these 20 years of waiting. God's giving you this provision, and now he has this fine-tuning that he's doing with you, this refinement that he's doing with you, that can you really be obedient? Can you really be disciplined? Can you really be focused on even the smallest of details? And so this is a time of testing. It is the period of 40s throughout the Bible, where every time you see 40, it is testing. 40 days and 40 nights it rained, 40 days and 40 nights on the mountain with Moses, 40 days of Jesus being tested. It's just all throughout the scriptures. And so what it tells me, Marlo, is that because God trusts you now, that he's called you into this battle because he can trust you, because you've shown yourself faithful, even in the I'm not an elegant waiter, even in I don't wait well. I still don't wait well. How much do you think that the enemy, in the Hebrew Hasatan, Satan, the accuser, hones in on people like yourself who are in this petitioning of the Lord, who are transparent, who cry out day and night with a particular want, a particular need, a particular desire? How often did you see him stealing that and using it against you and pitting this spiritual battle, this almost the where have you been? I've been wandering to and fro. Well, have you considered my daughter Marlo? The same words he spoke to Job. Have you felt like that in this journey?
Job is my favorite book of the Bible. I just love it because it makes so much sense to me. Because I have found in my life that trials and difficulties don't come one at a time. They just don't. It's a pile on. It's always a pile on. And I think that's what you're talking about. The idea that it's like we'll get a diagnosis, and then 2 or 3 other hard things are going to happen all at the same time. And that's happened to me consistently. And we had all of that, and then right after that is when God asked me to start this charity ranch for the kids in our community. And it's like, you've got to be kidding me. I have a brand new diagnosed kid with this disease I have to watch all day long, all night long. I'm forever watching. And I have all these children. We have all this stuff. And Brian's business was struggling more at that time. And okay, what are you going to do? So I see all that assault. And I find for me, Satan assaults me in my emotions through discouragement. That's where I can see him. It's like, you can't do that, or that's not going to work, that's going to fail. God is not leading, so I'll hear it there. Yeah, so
Well, that's very apparent.
yes, but it's to be expected anymore. So now I'm just like, you know what? It doesn't matter how you feel. You just do what you need to do, because I don't have time for that. And I need to watch Jaden. I watch Jaden. God says, let's start a ranch. Let's start a ranch. You know, I no longer, with all of this on my plate and all of the assault, have time to listen to all that blah 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 from the accuser.
There you go. Good. Well, I want to share an excerpt out of your book. Your final comments, a note to the reader. It says, "Dear friend, thank you for traveling with me through the life of Sarah, who learned to wait well. As I write this, rain is pattering on my office windows. Streaks of wetness tumble down the pane and soak into the ground beneath. The long-awaited California rain after a summer of drought. Our hills turned brown, our lawns dried up and died. We prayed for rain. We watched, we waited in the dryness as the rest of the world heard about the California drought. But now, finally, the rain has come. The grass is growing again, turning green and lush. And I laugh with the joy of it. I laugh because we waited so long for rain. And I know God was with us in the waiting and the dryness when life turned brown and the ground infertile. I think of Sarah and her years of dryness, the years when her womb was like the lawn turned to dust. But he sent her rain too. He sent life, a child, at the appointed time, just as he sent it to us. My God is the God of the wait and of the rain. He is the God of Sarah. Now as I watch the drizzles on the pane and leave Sarah's life, I realize that I'm not leaving it. It is my life. It is yours. It is a life that has learned the wonder of waiting. It's a life now filled with the hope of a whole world blessed. So I pray for you. I pray that as you walk with Sarah, you've embraced this God of waiting, of impossible promises come true, of perfect timing and laughter in the face of fear. And I pray that you'll find him in your own times of waiting, in your journey to the promised land. I pray that you catch your breath at the wonder of a God who works wonders in the long wait. Waiting for Wonder, Marlo. And P.S., if you'd like to know more about me or my other books, please visit my website at vividgod.com. Sign up for my newsletter or join me for thoughts on finding the wonder of God in everyday life. On Twitter at Marlo Schalesky. On Facebook at facebook.com, Marlo Schalesky. And she hopes to hear from you. Marlo, you've been a delight to be with us. It is just such a pleasure and a joy to meet you. You identify with the matriarch of my people, married to the patriarch of the nation of Israel. That I have a personal connection with this story because it's the story of my heritage, of my lineage, of my bloodline. Birth to a woman barren for 90 years. When I look at the promise given to her, I look at the promise given to all of us, that through a miracle birth, God would redeem his people. It was through the miracle birth of an infertile, barren woman. It was inconceivable that at that time for her to have a child. But God supernaturally ushered in the birth of Isaac, so the son of the promise, so that we could understand that this miracle birth of the virgin would usher in the Redeemer of all mankind, the promised son. And so it is with Marlo Schalesky, who takes you on a journey through the life of Sarah as it parallels her journey in a wonderful expose, waiting for wonder, learning to live on God's timeline. If you have been suffering with impatience, find the blessing in impatience. If you've been suffering with inelegant, awkward waiting, take comfort in inelegant and awkward waiting. Take a journey down this path that parallels the life of struggle with a life of promise and a life of deliverance. And read about this double portion blessing that Marlo has received. For her plans were for 3, and she received 6. Marlo Schalesky, thank you for being with us here on Revealing the Truth. We hope to see you again.
Thank you so much.
And that concludes today's Revealing the Truth. We'll return tomorrow, where we will have an unusual day, where we will have actually 4 authors joining us in the same time period. Until we see you again tomorrow, we wish you shalom. We wish you blessings in the name of Yeshua, Jesus, our Messiah. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Until then, shalom.